Hello, my name is Caroline Shea, and in this audio-visual screencast I will be discussing assessment in art and design education in the Junior Cert Cycle. I will break down my presentation and discuss the following sections. A SLAR I've taken part in my PME in art and design with digital media course in LSAD, my active role in the SLAR as a facilitator, the final descriptors of students' work after the SLAR, what I have learned by taking part in this SLAR, my opinions on the Junior Cert Cycle assessment approach, formative and summative assessment in art and design education, and finally the steps I wish to take when assessing my students' work in my future career. Before discussing this, I wish to address why should we assess art, and how can we discuss something that is so commonly referred to as subjective. We live in a society where anyone can do or make anything and call it art, but how can we assess this, or should we assess this? On screen is the NCCA definition of assessment in education. I agree with this statement by the NCCA, as art cannot be assessed as a simple right or wrong answer. Teachers must interpret, record, and gather a body of work before fully seeing students learning throughout a particular project in the art classroom. However, I do believe that art should be assessed, as assessment is not something for a student to fear or dread. By a teacher assessing the student's work, they are able to provide the student feedback that will enable them to actively improve on their work. This feedback can be varied from positive praise to highlighting areas of concern or providing suggestions for improvement. A way I have assessed students' artwork from the Junior Cert Cycle is by taking part in a SLAR. I participated in this SLAR during my time studying in the PME course in Limerick School of Art and Design. 3 other student teachers and I participated in this subject learning assessment review after our second school placement. Before going out on placement, I created an in-depth assessment plan for myself to refer back to during the project. Alongside this, I had also created an open-ended assessment rubric in detail that I created for each scheme I teach, as I believe that planning assessment before students begin a project is very important and it can be altered throughout the project if needed. This assessment plan was present in the SLAR and was shown and explained to the SLAR participants. I began my section of the SLAR by discussing my project to my peers, as I was the only participant to have a digital media scheme and asked students to work as part of groups. Along with having my students work in the SLAR, I was also selected to be the facilitator for the 3 other student teachers in this SLAR. As the facilitator, my role was to timekeep during the SLAR and to make sure each participant had time to discuss work under each descriptor. I also had to create a series of questions for my peers. These questions varied from prepared questions to improvised questions that came in mind while my peer was speaking about their students' work. These questions were commonly centered about if the students' work were matching the features of quality. Along with this, I also took many notes so I could speak to my peer in detail after the SLAR and say what I found interesting. I now wish to discuss the final outcomes of the SLAR and how my peers and I came to these final descriptors. Also give suggestions and any other information I found necessary for them to know. I began looking at the students' work from the in line with expectations descriptor, as I had no work in yet to meet for this SLAR. I explained my reasoning for being unsure if this was the right descriptor, as I had reflected again on my work the night before the SLAR. So instead of changing my original decision, I decided to ask my fellow student teachers' opinions and advice. After reviewing the students' work, looking at the final animation, and discussing the students' attitude towards group work, we collectively decided that this student belonged in the yet to meet expectations category. When looking at the student I had placed as in line with expectations, I was interestingly told by the participants in the SLAR that this student deserved to be in above expectations. After discussing this with my peers, I came to agree with them, as their points were valid. I feel that this experience of taking part in a SLAR has been really beneficial to me, as it has allowed me to listen to others' opinions on my own students' work and to see things I may have missed or not deemed important. For this student's work, I had placed in above expectations, and my peers agreed with me, as they believed the student's work matched the features of quality for this descriptor. When entering the SLAR, I had no student in exceptional, After being on placement in this school and being part of other SLARs, it became clear to me that exceptional descriptor is very rare and is truly for exceptional work. Since having this mindset, I placed the student in above expectations. However, I did state to my peers that his work is very close to exceptional, but I noted a few small areas that kept his work in this descriptor of above expectations. After reviewing his work and discussing his attitude with his group work activities, my peers challenged my decision and made me rethink my assessment criteria. They continued to point out areas in his work that would be exceptional and continued to question me and stating his influence on the final piece. After hearing what they had to say and looking back on my assessment criteria, I believe that this student had worked to a standard that would be considered exceptional. I have learned many things from completing this SLAR. Firstly, being able to give a chance to work collaboratively, as I was able to hear my peers' opinions on my scheme and students' work, and I was able to ask them questions and to further explain their opinions. Along with this, I also developed the ability to support my peers' assessment decisions with their students' work, as they also supported mine throughout the SLAR. My learning outcomes also align with the ASTI's explanation and purpose of conducting a SLAR for the junior cycle. Similar to how I found my SLAR experiences positive, I also believe the idea of taking part in a SLAR to be very beneficial for both the student and the teachers. The NCCA has stated that SLARs provide better feedback for students on their website. I completely agree with this statement, as the teacher can share the other participants' feedback to the student if this was not given to the student before the SLAR. In addition to this, the teachers will have a greater alignment of judgments with expected standards, and this can benefit the students studying the Junior Cert Cycle. However, I have felt divided by the language of the new descriptors. I personally find the phrasing of the descriptors to be quite broad and would like to see them being rephrased to a more concise and clear wording, especially for the benefits of students and parents who may be confused by this new way of reporting students' assessed work. I have expressed my opinions on this matter over my placement, and the other teachers I have spoken to feel this way about the new descriptors, and in my experience I have seen a want for this change. However, this system is still new and may work in other schools across the country. I personally find the phrasing of the descriptors to be quite broad and would like to see them being rephrased to a more concise and clear wording, especially for the benefits of students and parents who may be confused by this new way of reporting students' assessed work. I have expressed my opinions on this matter over my placement, and the other teachers I have spoken to feel this way about the new descriptors, and in my experience I have seen a want for this change. However, this system is still new and may work in other schools across the country. I now wish to discuss summative and formative assessment in art and design education. In art and design education, I believe both formative and summative assessment should be used, as I consider both types of assessment to be beneficial for students' learning. Throughout my placement, and especially in this scheme that the SLAR is addressing, I used formative assessment all throughout my scheme in both written and oral feedback. Goff states that formative assessment should be provided to learners while they are still learning a topic. I found this to be true when on placement, as this group of students had never made an animation before and needed to be provided feedback both individually and as a group in order to improve the work. Throughout my placement, I used oral and written formative feedback. Both forms of formative assessment worked well, as students could speak back and question me when I provided oral formative feedback, and when having written formative feedback, students could refer to what I had said when continuing to make their work. Along with this, I have also given each student a final descriptor, which is how I provided summative assessment for this scheme. In addition to this descriptor, I also gave my last piece of written feedback that gave a positive comment to their work and an area I feel they can improve. I consider this type of assessment to also be important in art education. Even with this positive outlook on formative assessment, I also consider summative assessment an important aspect of students' education. Bowton expresses her opinion on summative assessment on screen, while Goff also states that assessment can inspire and motivate students throughout their education. I agree with this statement, as I noticed once students were given a final descriptor in their summative assessment of all their work, they were interested in how they were placed in this descriptor, and they were motivated to move into the next higher descriptor. Personally, I feel that both summative and formative assessment is important for assessing artwork at post-primary level. This opinion has been developed from both my experiences teaching art and from the theory that I have read and mentioned in this presentation. In the future, I plan to continue creating open-ended assessment rubrics, as it has worked well for me in my placements over the past 2 years. I also wish to continue assessing my students' work both formatively and summatively. I believe assessment is very important, and that students need to be assessed in order to learn and continue to develop their work throughout the Junior Cert Cycle and when they continue into the Leaving Cert Cycle. Thank you for listening to my audio-visual presentation on assessment in art and design in the Junior Cert Cycle. Now on screen is my reference list and bibliography for this audio-visual presentation.